A biker slammed his boot into a service dog, right in front of a little girl in a wheelchair. She didn't scream. She couldn't. Her voice was too quiet, her body too fragile. But the dog, he moved like lightning. A German shepherd trained to protect, now facing real danger. Not in a war zone, but in a quiet city park in Charleston, West Virginia. It's a cloudy day here in Charleston. What's the weather like where you are? Tell us in the comments, and now, take a breath, sit with us, and let's begin this journey of quiet courage and healing. It was a late morning in Charleston, West Virginia, the kind of quiet weekday where the sky hung low and silvery above the city. The breeze in Haddad Riverfront Park whispered through the trees, barely strong enough to rustle the edge of Elowen Grace's light cardigan. The 9-year-old sat in her wheelchair on the paved path that curved along the Kanawha River, her hands folded neatly in her lap as she watched a squirrel skitter up a maple trunk. Her legs, thin beneath a fleece blanket, didn't move. They hadn't since the crash 2 years ago. Elowen had always been a still child, not out of shyness, but because she saw more when she stayed still. She had pale, freckled skin and wide, gray-blue eyes that always seemed to be searching for something invisible to others. Her hair was a thick tumble of brown waves, pulled back today in a messy braid that her mother, Lucille, had tied with a lavender ribbon. Beside her sat Ranger. Ranger was a 5-year-old German shepherd, large and imposing in form, but unnervingly calm in demeanor. His coat was a mottled mix of ash and honey, darker along his back and lighter at his legs and snout. One ear stood straight while the other was slightly bent from an old injury. He had the sort of eyes that didn't just look at you. They read you and judged quietly. Ranger had once been a canine search and rescue dog, deployed in flood zones and fire-stricken forests. He bore a long, faint scar under his left eye from a rescue in the Smoky Mountains, and though he had long since been retired, he never stopped watching, never stopped listening. He wore a black service harness that read, "Do not pet," in white print, though children often forgot that and reached out anyway. Ranger never flinched, but he never leaned into the touch either. His loyalty belonged to one person only, Elowen. 100 feet away, under a blue canvas canopy near the path's fork, stood the coffee vendor. Marvin, a man in his late 50s with a belly round as a bread loaf and a constant sheen of sweat across his forehead, was known for his terrible jokes and excellent cappuccinos. He had a voice like gravel and dressed like someone who didn't know it wasn't 1993 anymore. Cargo shorts, socks with sandals, and a t-shirt that said, "Decaf is a sin." Marvin had a soft spot for Elowen. He often saved the last sprinkle donut for her and knew how she liked her hot cocoa. 2 marshmallows, 1 floating, 1 drowned. Ranger suddenly stood. Elowen's head turned instinctively. Ranger never stood for squirrels or birds. The dog's ears pricked forward, muscles tense beneath his fur, and his body shifted slightly, blocking the front of Elowen's wheelchair. And then came the rumble. The motorcycle roared down the walking path like it didn't care it wasn't supposed to be there. It was a fat-tired black Harley, the kind that looked like it should come with a court date. Behind the handlebars sat a man built like a wrecking ball. Thick shoulders, thick neck, arms veined and tattooed. His name was Wade Kinney, though everyone who'd heard of him in Charleston called him Blazer. Blazer was in his early 40s, with leathery skin that looked sunburned even in winter. He had a thick, bristly beard and eyes that always seemed 2 seconds away from violence. People said he used to ride with a crew that got dissolved in a drug raid. No one knew what he did for a living now, just that he loitered, growled at cashiers, and parked where he pleased. He pulled up his bike near the bench beside Elowen, killed the engine, and dismounted with a grunt. "Cute mutt," he said, eyeing Ranger. Ranger didn't growl. He didn't move. But his eyes narrowed, just a little, and his posture remained rigid, his body still angled in front of Elowen's chair. "Bet he listens good, huh?" Blazer muttered, taking a step closer. "Military trained, I can tell." Elowen's fingers curled slightly over the armrest of her chair. "He's working," she said softly, not making eye contact. Blazer's mouth twisted into a smirk. "That's so? Working, huh?" Then, as casually as if he were stepping over a puddle, Blazer drew his booted foot back and kicked. It wasn't a hard kick. Not enough to injure, maybe, but deliberate, cruel. The kind of gesture that said, "I can, and who's going to stop me?" Ranger didn't yelp. He didn't snarl. But he took the hit, absorbing the blow without moving back an inch. Then, Like the drawing of a sword, his head lifted and turned toward Blazer, his stare sharp, still, and heavy as judgment. His body did not lunge, but it repositioned, squarely between Elowen and the biker. Blazer chuckled. Huh, so he's trained not to bite. Good boy, real good boy. A voice called out from the distance. Hey, that your idea of fun? Blazer turned, annoyed. Marvin stood behind his coffee stand, phone in hand. His tone wasn't mocking. It was firm. Blazer frowned, glanced once more at Ranger, then at the little girl behind him. Her face was pale but calm. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She looked at him like he was a storm cloud she'd already learned to survive. He muttered something under his breath, spat to the side, then swung a leg back over the bike. The engine roared again, louder this time. And just like that, Blazer was gone, swallowed into the winding trees and the screech of his tires. Ranger didn't move for several seconds after the bike vanished. Then slowly, deliberately, he turned to Elowen and placed his chin gently on her knee, his silent way of asking, "Are you okay?" Elowen didn't speak. Her fingers found his ear, the one bent with the scar, and rubbed softly. She nodded. Marvin arrived a moment later, red in the face and panting from the jog. "I got it on camera," he wheezed, waving the phone. "That guy's bad news. You want me to call someone?" Lucille Grace came hurrying up the path at that moment, a nurse's badge still clipped to her belt. She was a lean woman in her 30s, with sharp cheekbones and eyes like Elowen's. Only harder, more tired. She had just gotten off a night shift and looked as though she hadn't slept in 2 days. Her ponytail was unraveling, and her scrubs smelled faintly of antiseptic and exhaustion. "Ellie?" she said, dropping to her knees. "What happened?" Elowen didn't answer immediately. She looked at Ranger, then at her mother, then at Marvin. Her voice was quiet, but unwavering. "Someone tried to hurt him." Lucille's face darkened as Marvin replayed the video for her. Ranger stayed still, as if knowing the attention wasn't on him for now, but never leaving Elowen's side. His tail didn't wag, his ears didn't droop. He simply watched and waited. Somewhere above them, clouds began to gather more thickly. The wind picked up, soft and uncertain. A moment later, Ranger lifted his head. Not because of the weather, because even now, something in the air told him this wasn't over. Not yet. The following morning began without color. The sky over Charleston remained the same uniform gray it had been the day before, casting a silvery haze over the rooftops and tree-lined streets. In the modest 2-bedroom apartment above Charleston's 6th Street Pharmacy, Elowen sat at the window, watching the traffic pass by below. Her wheelchair was angled just right so that she could see the distant shimmer of the river if she squinted. But her eyes weren't focused there. She was thinking about the man on the motorcycle, the sound of his boot connecting with Ranger's side, the awful grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Her fingers rested on the thick fur of Ranger's back. The dog lay stretched out on the rug beside her, completely still, his head tilted slightly in her direction, as if listening to the thoughts she didn't speak aloud. Ranger hadn't left her side since yesterday. Not when Lucille brought home leftover chicken soup. Not when the apartment quieted under the low hum of the fridge and the ticking of the wall clock. And not when Elowen woke in the middle of the night with a dry sob caught in her chest, breathless and dreaming of spinning metal and screams. She remembered that sound, the sound her father made. Lucille Grace stood at the stove in the small galley kitchen, her scrubs exchanged for old jeans and a soft flannel shirt that hung loose on her wiry frame. She was a woman who had learned to be efficient with both words and movement, tall and lean with hands that always seemed half-wound, like springs under constant tension. A once warm nature had been weathered down by long shifts at the hospital and the weight of single motherhood. Her jaw had a natural set of determination, and the lines around her mouth had deepened since the accident. She stirred a pan of oatmeal, pausing every now and then to glance at her daughter, unsure whether to say anything. The video Marvin had shown her last night still played in her mind. The man. The boot. Ranger's restraint. "How's Ranger?" she asked finally. Elowen didn't look away from the window. "He's listening." Lucille set the spoon down and leaned on the counter. "Of course he is." There was a silence, soft but heavy. Elowen spoke first. "Can I see the box again?" Lucille's shoulders tensed just slightly. "Are you sure?" Elowen nodded. The box was kept in the top shelf of Lucille's bedroom closet, behind a stack of folded linens. It was no bigger than a shoebox, wrapped in plain brown paper and tied once with black string. It had arrived by courier a week after the funeral. No return address, just a name, Grace. Lucille brought it into the living room and set it carefully on Elowen's lap. The girl untied the string and lifted the lid. Inside was a folded flag, a laminated photograph. Her father in his search and rescue uniform, tall and broad-shouldered, with a smile that hinted at mischief. There were letters, too, still sealed, written in his angular, slanted handwriting, and beneath the letters, a smaller box with Ranger's original K9 badge, polished and cool to the touch. "I don't remember his voice," Elowen said quietly. Lucille pulled a chair up beside her. "He had a deep voice, but soft, especially with you. When you were a baby, he used to sing that terrible lullaby. What was it? The one about the muddy boots?" "I don't remember," Elowen said again. Lucille reached over and gently placed her hand on Elowen's. That day, when the call came in from the mountain team, they said there had been a gas explosion in the storage tunnel. He didn't make it out, but Ranger did. Elowen looked down at the dog. They were together? Lucille nodded. Always. A beat passed. Then Elowen's voice cracked just slightly. "Why would anyone want to hurt him?" Lucille didn't answer right away. Some people get angry at things they can't control, and some people, they just like to break what they don't understand. Elowen stared down at Ranger's scarred ear, brushing her fingers across the torn edge. "But he's not broken." "No," Lucille said. "He's not." The next few hours passed in soft motion. Lucille cleaned. Elowen sketched quietly in her notebook, drawing Ranger in his usual half-curled pose beside her chair. Outside, the day grew colder. The clouds dropped lower. Around noon, a soft knock came at the door. Lucille opened it to find an older woman standing in the hall. Mid-60s, compact and sturdy, with sharp eyes behind square glasses and hair pulled back into a tidy salt and pepper bun. She wore a canvas utility jacket with a name badge clipped to the breast pocket. "Miss Grace, I'm Sandra Klein. I work with the Animal Welfare Office. Heard about the incident at Haddad Park yesterday." Lucille blinked, surprised. "That was quick." "Marvin sent the footage directly to us. We've had prior complaints about the man in the video, just never anything this clear." Lucille stepped aside. "Come in." Sandra moved with the assurance of someone used to command. She looked down at Ranger, who had risen quietly and stood at attention beside Elowen. "Good posture," Sandra murmured. "He's still on active service?" Lucille shook her head. "Technically retired. He's a support animal now." Sandra nodded. "Still carries himself like he's ready for deployment." She knelt carefully and extended a hand for Ranger to sniff. He allowed it, eyes steady. "He's a good one," Sandra said. "We don't see many like him anymore." Elowen watched the exchange closely. "He's not just good," the girl said. "He saved people." Sandra turned to her, curious. "Did he?" Lucille stepped in. "He was part of a rescue unit in Mississippi during the floods 4 years ago. Pulled 3 survivors out of a collapsed church building. And he was on the line during that fire in Blue Ridge. Saved 2 hikers trapped in a gully." Sandra looked impressed. "That's a legacy." Elowen whispered, "He saved me too, twice." Sandra smiled softly. "Then, maybe it's time the city remembered what service looks like." She handed Lucille a card. "We're pressing charges. Assaulting a service animal is a federal offense. I'll be in touch if we need testimony. In the meantime, take care of him." When she left, Elowen looked over at Ranger and whispered, "You were a hero before I ever knew you." Ranger didn't wag his tail or raise his head. He simply lay down at her side again, eyes half closed, listening. Later that night, as the apartment darkened and the street lamps glowed like faint moons beyond the window, Elowen asked her mother a question she hadn't dared ask before. "Did Daddy pick Ranger for me?" Lucille hesitated. "He requested him." Elowen's voice was so quiet it could have been mistaken for breathing. "Why?" Lucille knelt beside her. "Because Ranger doesn't leave his people behind. Not ever." It had been 3 days since the park incident. The bruise on Ranger's ribs, slight as it was, had faded beneath his thick coat, but his vigilance had not. Elowen could feel the shift in him. His alertness sharpened, his ears constantly twitching to sounds beyond her reach. He still lay beside her wheelchair every evening, head on his paws, but his eyes seldom rested. Something had changed in him, or perhaps something old had simply awakened. The apartment building where Elowen and her mother lived was one of Charleston's aging structures. 3 stories of sun-bleached brick and narrow hallways that echoed more than they should. The elevator rattled like a coughing man, and the wallpaper in the lobby peeled at the corners like paper trying to escape itself. But it was home, and in a strange way, it was safe. Until this afternoon. Lucille had left for a late shift at Charleston General Hospital, her keys clinking against her hip as she offered Elowen one last hug and a reminder to heat the leftover soup. Ranger watched her go with his usual stoicism, only relaxing slightly once the door locked behind her. Elowen returned to her drawing. She had started sketching a comic strip featuring Ranger as a detective with a monocle. But before she could finish the second panel, the door buzzer crackled. She wheeled herself toward it slowly. Ranger was already there, standing rigid with his nose to the bottom of the door, his entire posture radiating unease. Elowen pressed the intercom button. Yes? No answer. She waited, then tried again. Hello? A pause, then a voice unmistakably low and oily. Sorry, kid. Looking for someone. Which way to Unit 2? B. Elowen froze. It was him. The man from the park. Blazer. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. Ranger's tail stiffened, his stance shifting slightly. Protective. From the hallway came the soft sound of a boot dragging against the old floor tiles. Then another thud. Slow. Deliberate. Elowen reached for her phone but didn't unlock it. She didn't look away from the door. Outside, Blazer leaned closer to the peephole. He wasn't wearing his leather jacket today. Instead, he wore a dark denim vest over a long-sleeved thermal shirt and ripped jeans. His beard looked more unkempt than it had days ago, and a scar on his cheek, one Elowen hadn't noticed before, creased with every slight movement of his mouth. Just lost, he said again, then added with a smile she couldn't see but somehow felt, Tell your mutt not to eyeball people unless he wants to lose the other ear. Some dogs don't know their place. Ranger let out a soft, low growl, not the warning kind, but the kind rooted in memory, a sound that came from somewhere deeper. Blazer laughed under his breath and turned to go. See you around. His footsteps faded down the hall, the elevator groaning moments later as the doors shut. Elowen sat in silence. She didn't cry, but her hands trembled on the arms of her chair. Ranger moved to her side, pressing his head gently against her hip. His weight was grounding. Present. Real. 15 minutes later, there was a soft knock. Gentle this time. Who is it? Elowen called, heart still pounding. It's Mr. Harris, came the reply. Downstairs, neighbor. Ranger relaxed slightly, though his ears remained perked. Elowen opened the door slowly. Mr. Harris was nearly 80, with a cane carved from ironwood and a suit he wore even on weekends. Always a button-up, always a pressed pair of trousers, even when his socks didn't match. He had skin like worn parchment and hands permanently gnarled from arthritis. But his eyes were still alert and a shade of green that looked almost too vibrant for his age. I saw him, he said simply, stepping just inside the door with a respectful nod toward Ranger. The man, that biker. Elowen nodded. He said he was lost. Mr. Harris gave a dry snort. Lost? That man's been hanging around these parts for years. Sometimes he disappears for months, then shows up like a bad penny. You remember that orange tabby from the alley 2 winters ago? Elowen nodded. She had fed the cat milk once. Then it vanished. Blazer stomped him, broke the spine, Mr. Harris said, voice flat. Police couldn't prove it. No footage, no witnesses who'd speak. Elowen's face went pale. Lucille had never told her. Or maybe she'd tried to protect her from it. But she believed Mr. Harris instantly. He's got a record, Harris added. But you didn't hear that from me. I used to be a municipal clerk. Saw names, saw patterns. And I've seen eyes like his before. What kind of eyes? Harris looked toward Ranger. The kind that hates what it fears, and fears what it can't own. Ranger stood beside Elowen again, ears alert. Mr. Harris tapped his cane twice. You keep your doors locked, Miss Elowen. And you listen to that dog. He's not just protecting you. He's remembering something you don't. Elowen nodded slowly. Mr. Harris turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. Oh, and if your mother gets home late, tell her the light above the back stairwell's busted again. That's not a good sign, with him sniffing around. When the door closed again, Elowen finally opened her sketchbook. She scratched out the detective monocle on Ranger's comic and drew instead a scar across his brow, then added shadows behind him. Not to make him scary, but to show the things he was holding back. The sky outside had darkened to a deep steel color by the time Lucille came home. Her eyes scanned the apartment immediately, her nurse's instincts catching on the slight tension in the air. Elowen told her everything. Lucille didn't say a word for a long time. She walked to the window, looked out at the parking lot, then picked up her phone. She called Officer Klein, the animal welfare officer they had met a few days ago. "He was here," Lucille said into the phone, low and firm. "Outside our door. No reason. Threatened the dog again." Elowen couldn't hear the other side, but Lucille's jaw tightened. "We'll keep the doors locked. Just keep us in mind if something happens." After she hung up, she turned to Elowen, kneeling beside her. "He's not going to hurt you," she said. "I'm not scared," Elowen whispered, "but I think he's scared of Ranger." Lucille blinked. "What makes you think that?" Elowen reached down and rubbed behind Ranger's ears. "Because Ranger doesn't move like other dogs. He doesn't bark when he's angry. He waits." Lucille looked at the dog and then back at her daughter. "That's what your dad used to say too." The apartment fell quiet again. Ranger moved to the window, where he remained standing long after everyone else had gone to bed, watching, waiting. He did not sleep that night. The clock read 2:17 a.m. The apartment was steeped in that heavy kind of silence that only came in the middle of the night. Too quiet, as if the world were holding its breath. Outside, a light drizzle whispered against the windows, casting streaks across the glass like slow-moving tears. Inside, Elowen Grace lay in bed, half awake, her blankets tangled at her waist and her hair fanned across the pillow. Her bedroom nightlight glowed dim amber in the corner, barely touching the walls with warmth. Ranger lay on the rug at the foot of her bed, his body still but his ears twitching slightly. He had been dozing, lightly, never fully, and now something had changed. His eyes opened. There was a sound, not loud, not even obvious. A brush of movement beyond the apartment's thin walls. His nose twitched. Then he was up. The growl that came from him wasn't like the ones before. It was lower, tighter, measured. He padded silently to the bedroom door, turned his head to look back at Elowen once, then moved into the hallway. His paws made almost no sound against the floor, only a soft whisper of fur and nail. Elowen sat up slowly, heart suddenly racing without knowing why. She reached for her wheelchair beside the bed, maneuvered herself into it with practiced care, and followed the direction Ranger had gone, the front door. Ranger stood stiff, alert, directly in front of it. His shoulders were squared, tail straight behind him, the fur along his spine slightly lifted. His eyes were fixed on the door, as if he could see through it. Then came a noise. A shadow moved across the bottom edge of the door, just for a second, but unmistakable. Elowen froze, breath caught. She didn't need to look through the peephole, she knew. Blazer. The hallway outside was dimly lit by an old fluorescent strip that flickered every few seconds. Through the slight gap at the bottom of the door, Elowen saw the outline of boots. Heavy. The kind that left marks. Her hand reached instinctively for the small medical alert button clipped to the side of her chair. She didn't press it. Instead, she grabbed the landline on the entry table and dialed. Lucille answered after 2 rings, her voice groggy. She had only been asleep an hour after her late shift. "Mom," Elowen whispered, "he's here." Lucille was immediately awake. "Where?" "Elowen," she called sharply, her voice coming alive with that nurse's edge of clarity. "Is he inside?" "No," Elowen said, "but Ranger saw him. He's right outside. I'm calling the police." Lucille hung up. Elowen sat completely still, her eyes locked on Ranger. He had not moved, only adjusted his weight to keep himself between the door and Elowen. A sentinel, a statue of muscle and loyalty. For several minutes there was only the sound of the rain outside and the electric hum of the hallway light. Then, silence. The shadow was gone. Ranger's head turned slowly toward the front window, which overlooked the parking lot 3 floors below. He moved to it, stood on his hind legs, and peered between the curtains with unblinking eyes. Elowen followed, her wheels making a gentle click on the wooden floor. They both saw him. Blazer stood by a lamppost at the far end of the lot, half-shadowed by the drizzling fog. He was staring up at the window. At them. The corner of his mouth curled, as if in challenge. Then he turned and disappeared into the mist. The police arrived 17 minutes later. 2 officers, both in standard black uniforms and duty belts, weighed down with radios and flashlights. One was Officer Carla Mendoza, a woman in her 30s with a round face and thick black hair tied in a tight bun. Her tone was professional but kind. She had dark, alert eyes and spoke with a low, careful cadence, as if measuring the weight of each word before letting it go. The other officer was younger, probably new to the force, named Colin Ridge. He was lean, nervous-looking, with a fresh scar on his chin and hands that fidgeted around his flashlight. Elowen let them in while Lucille remained on the phone, speaking to Sandra Klein at Animal Welfare again. Ranger sniffed both officers briefly before sitting near the door, his body still humming with silent tension. "You're sure it was the same man?" Officer Mendoza asked, notebook in hand. Elowen nodded. "He didn't try to break in?" "No, he just stood there. He wanted us to see him." Ridge looked toward the window, visibly unsettled. "Who does that? Just stands in the rain?" "Someone who wants you to feel unsafe," Mendoza said flatly. "You're lucky the dog's trained." Ranger turned slightly at the word dog, but made no noise. Lucille hung up and approached the group, her expression taut but controlled. She wore her work scrubs and had only slipped a cardigan over them. Her eyes were red-rimmed from sleep deprivation, but burned with steady determination. "We're pressing charges," she said. "I don't care if he didn't touch the door. This is targeted harassment." Mendoza nodded. "We've got the report from the park incident, and Sandra flagged him to us after your last call. We're building a case." "Build it faster," Lucille muttered. After the officers left, Elowen returned to her room, too restless to sleep. Ranger padded in behind her and lay down by the foot of the bed again, eyes never closing. Elowen didn't lie down. Instead, she wheeled over to her desk and opened a small blue leather-bound notebook with frayed corners. On the cover, she wrote with a black gel pen, "Ranger's Watch, Volume 1. She opened to the first page and drew, a soft pencil sketch of the front door, Ranger in front of it. Every muscle tense, every sense awake. Her lines were delicate but detailed. She had inherited her father's patience with angles and her mother's eye for expression. The page filled slowly. She added the date, then a title, 2:17 a.m., He Saw Him First. Below it, she wrote, "He didn't bark. He didn't run. He just stood between me and the fear like it was always meant to be his burden, not mine." By the time dawn rose over the city and sunlight began to trickle between the clouds, Elowen was still at her desk. She had drawn 3 more pages, each one a moment from the night, each one carefully dated and labeled. Ranger remained at her feet, silent as stone. Lucille walked in just after 6 and paused at the doorway. Her gaze fell on the notebook, then on her daughter's face. Elowen looked up. "I needed to keep it somewhere," she said. Lucille walked over, brushing a hand across Elowen's hair, then down Ranger's back. "Good," she said softly. "Then we'll remember." And together, the 3 of them watched the morning rise, tired, shaken, but still standing. The Charleston morning had been unusually warm for late October, with the sun casting amber light across the brick hospital facade and drying the rain-slick sidewalks from the night before. The air still held a chill, but the kind that stirred leaves, not fears. Elowen had worn her soft fleece hoodie, the sleeves a bit too long, hiding the tips of her fingers as she wheeled herself through the hospital's automatic doors. Ranger padded beside her. His leash clipped securely to her chair, though she didn't need it. He followed her like gravity followed the earth. Lucille walked just ahead, a clipboard in hand, reviewing the after-visit summary from Dr. Hanley, Elowen's neurologist. The woman's shoulders were hunched from lack of sleep, and the purplish shadows under her eyes had become permanent fixtures. Still, her movements were precise. Lucille Grace didn't allow herself to lose focus. Not since the crash. Not since her daughter's legs stopped moving. Not since the man she loved never came home. The checkup had gone well. No deterioration, no new complications, just another reminder that the road ahead would be long but steady. Elowen had been quiet the whole appointment, but not withdrawn. She was saving her words, her sketches, her emotions. That was how she worked now. And Ranger, always silent, always sensing, remained by her side like a constant breath. They reached the elevator and descended to the underground parking garage, which was half lit and echoed with the distant sound of dripping water. Fluorescent lights flickered in overhead strips, casting long bands of shadow across the concrete. Lucille glanced around as they stepped out. It was quiet. Too quiet. The car was parked near the far end, in the same spot they always used when coming to the hospital. Elowen wheeled herself forward as Lucille moved to unlock the passenger door. That's when it happened. A sudden blur of movement from behind a parked SUV. A grunt. A flash of denim and leather. Lucille didn't even have time to scream before she was shoved aside with brutal force. Blazer. He emerged with the raw power of someone used to dominance, his eyes wide and wild, bloodshot with something that was more than rage. He grabbed for Ranger's harness with a grunt, trying to wrench the dog away from Elowen's chair. "Stupid mutt, should have finished what I started," he growled. But Ranger was no longer a retired service dog. He was a soldier. In one motion, Ranger lunged sideways, twisting his body and planting himself between Blazer and Elowen. The growl that erupted from his chest was unlike anything Elowen had ever heard from him. Deep, primal, and threaded with a fury that didn't come from instinct, but from memory. The sound vibrated through the garage. Blazer reached again, furious now, but Ranger snapped his jaws inches from the man's wrist. No bite. Not yet. But a final warning. That was enough. Blazer stumbled back, startled by the sheer power and control in the dog's response. He tripped over the curb at the base of the wall, fell backward, and hit the concrete hard. That was when the shouting started. Across the garage, a couple stood frozen beside a Prius. The woman was holding a diaper bag and a stroller with a sleepy toddler inside. The man, tall and thin, with glasses and an expression of utter disbelief, had his phone out and was filming. "Got it all," he muttered. "Jesus, I got the whole thing." Lucille scrambled to her feet, clutching her elbow where she'd hit the ground. Blood smeared the fabric of her sleeve, but her face was filled not with pain, but fury. "You're done," she hissed, stepping between Elowen and Blazer, who was still trying to recover his footing. "You sick coward. You came for a child. Again." Blazer looked up, breathing hard, teeth clenched. "You think I'm scared of a mutt and a cripple?" But there was no power left in his words, not when Ranger stood before him, unmoving, unblinking, and ready to strike if given reason. A final snarl curled from the dog's mouth, controlled but unmistakable. The man with the glasses walked forward now, holding up his phone. "I filmed everything," he said, voice shaky but firm. "You laid hands on her. You attacked them. And the dog? He didn't touch you. Not once." Blazer's eyes darted around the garage. No other exit, no place to run without passing Lucille and the dog. His face twisted into something between a grimace and a sneer. And then, without a word, he backed away, disappearing into the shadows behind the elevator bank. Ranger didn't move until the echo of his boots faded completely. Lucille turned to the couple. "Can you send me that video? Please, we need it for the police." The woman nodded quickly, pulling out her phone to share it. Elowen hadn't spoken the entire time. Not when Blazer appeared, not when he tried to take Ranger, not even when her mother fell. But now, as Ranger returned to her side and nudged her hand with his nose, the dam inside her cracked. She leaned forward in her wheelchair and wrapped her arms around the dog's neck. Her shoulders began to shake. The tears came slow at first, then heavier. Not out of fear, not even pain, but because for the second time in a week, Ranger had chosen her over danger, and he had won. Lucille dropped to one knee beside them, resting her hand on her daughter's back, the other on Ranger's thick fur. The man with the phone cleared his throat, suddenly awkward. "I sent it," he said, "and, I'm gonna call security up here too, just in case he comes back." "Thank you," Lucille said, voice hoarse. "Really." As they waited for the officers to arrive, Elowen slowly wiped her eyes with her sleeve. She reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out her notebook, the same one she'd started after the hallway encounter, Ranger's watch. She turned to a blank page and began to draw, not shaking this time, steady, bold. This time, she titled the page, "The Garage." 10:36 a.m., and beneath the drawing, in small but certain handwriting, she wrote, "He stood when others fell. He growled when silence wasn't enough. He didn't run, not for me, but with me." The animal clinic smelled like antiseptic and warm fur. Sunlight streamed in through the glass windows of the Charleston Veterinary Center, catching on the edges of framed certificates and glossy photos of smiling pets. But in the examination room, it was Ranger who commanded all the attention. He lay on the padded table without restraint, calm and dignified as always. His coat, slightly damp from the morning rain, glistened under the fluorescent lights. Dr. Miriam Voss moved around him with practiced grace, her fingers probing along his ribs, under his harness, around the base of his ears. Dr. Voss was in her early 50s, compact and sturdy, with silver-streaked auburn hair pulled into a loose bun and wire-rimmed glasses that often slipped down her nose. She had the quiet presence of someone who had long ago learned to let animals speak before humans did. She wore a dark green scrub top decorated with embroidered paw prints, and a pen tucked behind one ear. Lucille watched from the corner, arms crossed, still tense. She hadn't let Elowen out of her sight since the parking garage incident. Elowen, for her part, sat just beside the exam table in her wheelchair, her fingers curled protectively around the edge of Ranger's service vest. "He's lucky," Dr. Voss finally said, her voice steady but kind. "No internal bruising, no fractures, and his reflexes are perfect. A lesser dog could have been injured by that kind of shove." "He's not a lesser dog," Elowen said, almost immediately. Voss smiled, offering a small nod. "No, I can see that. He's special." Lucille exhaled slowly, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. "So, he's clear to continue his duties?" "Yes," Dr. Voss replied, gently brushing a small leaf from Ranger's shoulder. "But keep an eye on him for stiffness or soreness. Dogs like him won't always show pain, especially when they think someone else needs protecting." Ranger shifted slightly, nudging Elowen's arm with his snout. She scratched behind his ears, right where the fur grew thin near the old scar. They returned home just after noon, the sky bright and wind picking up across the river. Back in the apartment, the scent of chamomile and faint lemon cleaner hung in the air. Elowen wheeled herself to the window, where she often wrote in her sketchbook. But today she didn't draw. She turned toward the table, grabbed a lined sheet of notebook paper and her black pen. After a few moments of quiet, she began to write. "To the mayor of Charleston, my name is Elowen Grace. I am 9 years old and I live in the 6th Street Apartments. I use a wheelchair because of an accident. But this letter isn't about me. It's about my dog, Ranger. Ranger is not just a service dog. He is a hero. In the last 2 weeks, he has protected me from someone who wanted to hurt me. Not once, but twice. He never bit anyone. He never attacked. He just stood his ground, blocked danger, and made sure I was safe. That's what heroes do." Lucille paused while folding laundry and watched her daughter write, not interrupting. She knew this was more than a letter. It was a statement, a reclamation of voice. Before Ranger became mine, he saved people in fires and floods. He worked with my dad, who was a rescue officer before he died in a tunnel collapse. Ranger survived. My dad didn't. But Ranger came to me, and he's been saving me ever since. I think Charleston should officially recognize him. Please name Ranger an honorary hero dog of our city. He deserves to be remembered for what he did, for me and for others. Thank you for reading. Sincerely, Elowen Grace. She added a final line at the bottom, in her best cursive. P.S. He doesn't talk much, but he's always listening. Lucille read the letter silently. Her eyes shimmered but didn't fall. "It's perfect," she whispered. They mailed it that afternoon. Elowen insisted on placing the envelope in the mailbox herself. Ranger sat beside her, his posture regal, as if he knew this moment meant something. The letter reached City Hall within 2 days. By the end of the week, someone at the mayor's office, no one knew who, shared a photo of it online. A scan of the handwritten words with a caption that simply read, "Some heroes wear fur." This one saved a little girl in Charleston. It caught fire. Local news picked it up. A radio host on 98.5 FM read the letter aloud during the morning show. The clip was shared again and again, especially after the footage from the hospital parking garage surfaced. Dozens of Charleston residents commented on social media, calling Ranger Charleston's guardian, the four-legged firefighter, the dog with the silent heart. But the most surprising response came 3 days later, delivered not through likes or shares, but in a plain manila envelope addressed to the Grace's apartment. Lucille opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten letter and a photograph of a man in his 40s, standing beside a collapsed house. Soot stains on his clothes, eyes tired but kind. The letter read, "Dear Elowen, you don't know me, but I knew Ranger. My name is Dean Cartwright. 4 years ago during the Blue Ridge fire, I was trapped under part of my garage. I couldn't move. Smoke was everywhere. It was Ranger who found me. He didn't bark or panic. He just lay next to me until the others came. He kept me from passing out. The rescue team told me later he refused to leave until I was out. I never got the chance to thank him, but I remember those eyes. You said Ranger doesn't talk much. That's true. But I want you to know, he speaks in ways most people never will. If Charleston doesn't honor him, then I will. Thank you for reminding us what a real hero looks like. Sincerely, Dean." Elowen held the photo in her hands for a long time. Then she went to her desk, opened Ranger's watch, and turned to a new page. This time, she didn't draw Ranger in front of danger. She drew him lying next to a collapsed garage wall, his eyes open, body still, protecting someone he had never met before. She wrote, "He doesn't protect for recognition, he doesn't save to be seen. But someone always remembers." That evening, the mayor's office called. Lucille answered. Her face changed slowly as she listened, her shoulders rising, then falling. When she hung up, she turned to her daughter and smiled. "They want to meet Ranger, officially." Ranger, who had been lying near the window, lifted his head, sensing the shift. Elowen grinned. "What did I tell you?" she whispered, bending to hug him tight. "You're a hero, and now everyone else knows it too." The Charleston County Courthouse stood like a solemn guardian over Capitol Street, its white stone columns catching the soft light of morning. On this day, the air was crisp and clear, the kind of rare autumn weather that felt borrowed from spring. People passed by the courthouse steps with coffee in hand and hurried strides, unaware that inside, a girl in a wheelchair and her silent protector were about to change the rhythm of the day. Lucille Grace parked the car in the courthouse lot with calm precision, though her hands gripped the steering wheel longer than necessary. In the back seat, Elowen adjusted the sleeves of her navy blue cardigan, her fingers shaking slightly despite the warmth of the sun. Ranger sat beside her, unflinching, wearing his polished harness and service tag like armor. His scarred right ear flicked in the silence, but his posture was calm, ready. They were met at the entrance by Officer Carla Mendoza, the same woman who had responded after Blazer's late-night hallway visit. Today she was dressed in full uniform, hair in a tighter bun, badge gleaming. She gave Elowen a nod that was more than formal. It was protective. "Ready?" she asked gently. Elowen looked at Ranger. The dog met her gaze, steady and deep. She nodded. "Ready." The courtroom was quiet when they entered, just the shuffle of papers, the soft murmurs of attorneys, and the occasional squeak of old bench wood. Blazer was already seated at the defendant's table, flanked by a weary public defender and avoiding eye contact with everyone. He looked smaller than he had before. Not physically. He was still tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-leathered skin and a jagged tattoo curling up one forearm. But there was a sag in his posture now, like a balloon slowly leaking air. The prosecutor, Daniel Rhodes, was a wiry man in his early 40s, with sharp cheekbones and a voice that carried without shouting. He wore a tailored gray suit and gold-rimmed glasses that never slipped. Known for his cool efficiency, he was rarely described as emotional, but when he spoke of the case, there was weight in his voice. "This is not just an assault," he began. "This is a pattern. This is a man who waited, watched, and returned multiple times to harass and physically endanger a disabled child and her certified service dog. Thanks to the bravery of a bystander and the strength of a little girl, we have video evidence. We have testimony. We have the truth." On the bench sat Judge Helen Dorsey, a woman in her 60s with iron gray hair swept into a tight knot and a face carved by years of difficult decisions. Her reputation was one of balance, firm when needed, compassionate when earned. She had no patience for spectacle, but today she allowed the room to feel the silence after Rhodes's words. Then came the video. The footage from the hospital parking garage played on a screen for the court to see. There was Blazer's hand on Elowen's wheelchair, the shove, the snarl. The moment Ranger stepped between them, the growl that froze the air, the retreat. Blazer's defense attorney, a soft-spoken woman named Jessa Tull, with tired eyes and a folder of paper-thin arguments, rose afterward and tried to paint her client as troubled, reactive, suffering from unaddressed trauma. But the images were too strong, the facts too rooted. The judge's eyes never blinked. Finally, Judge Dorsey called on the victim. Lucille wheeled Elowen to the center of the courtroom. The girl was small in the vast wood-paneled space, her frame lost in her chair, but her presence was not. Ranger sat at her side, unmoving. "You may speak," Judge Dorsey said softly. Elowen looked at the judge, then at Blazer, who would not meet her eyes. "I don't want to talk about what he did," she said. Her voice was clear, quiet, and unwavering. "I want to talk about Ranger." She paused, placing a hand on Ranger's back. Ranger didn't bark. He didn't bite. He didn't run. He just stood between me and something that wanted to hurt me. She looked back at the judge. He did what any father would do. He protected his kid. A hush settled over the room. Judge Dorsey's mouth pressed into a line. Then she looked at Blazer, whose head had dropped slightly. "Mr. Larrick," she said, her voice suddenly steel, "you've shown repeated disregard for the law, for the vulnerable, and for the very idea of decency. Your behavior is not only dangerous, it is cowardly. You targeted someone you assumed couldn't fight back, but you forgot that some protectors don't need words. They only need purpose." The gavel did not fall immediately. First came the sentence: 1 year in jail for assault, 2 years probation upon release, permanent restraining order. You are not to come within 100 yards of Elowen Grace or her home, school, or known associates. Violate this, and the penalty escalates to felony charges. She looked at Ranger. "And while the law does not formally grant titles to animals, I will note for the record the court's recognition of Ranger as a hero and protector of the city of Charleston." The gavel came down. In the hallway afterward, reporters were already gathering. A few photographers angled for shots, but Officer Mendoza kept a respectful perimeter. Elowen didn't speak to the press, neither did Lucille. But someone had already posted the court transcript online, and the moment of Elowen's words, "He did what any father would do," had begun to spread. By evening, Twitter, Facebook, and local news sites were flooded with variations of one name, the Silent Guardian. Some made t-shirts, others shared their own stories. Veterans who had served with Ranger's unit, families whose homes he had searched after disasters, strangers who had only heard his name for the first time that morning. At home, Elowen took out Ranger's watch and opened to a new page. She didn't draw Blazer, not even the courthouse. Instead, she drew Ranger sitting in front of the courthouse steps, head held high, with a small girl resting her hand on his back. The title at the top was simple: "Not All Heroes Roar," and beneath it, "Some Just Wait, and when the time comes, they do the thing that no one else had the courage to do." The golden canopy of Kanawha trees in Charleston Central Park filtered sunlight like it had been poured through a stained glass window. It was a warm day for late autumn, the kind of afternoon that made people forget winter was ever coming. Squirrels skittered along the winding paths, children laughed in the distance, and the quiet sound of wind and dry leaves whispered a peace that had been long earned. Near the stone amphitheater, folding chairs had been arranged in semicircles, facing a modest wooden stage decorated with burgundy sashes, and a banner that read, "Charleston honors its heroes." The edges of the stage were lined with flower pots and handmade wreaths. At the very center, a single chair had been set apart, wider, lower, fitted with a blue velvet cushion. That chair was for Ranger. Lucille stood to one side, adjusting Elowen's sweater collar with careful fingers. She looked different today, not because of her clothes, which were the usual clean-cut nurse's slacks and a pressed button-up, but because of her posture. There was no tension in her shoulders, no tightness around the mouth, just softness, just light. And her eyes, those were filled with something else entirely, pride. Elowen herself sat tall in her wheelchair, hair in a tidy braid, with a silver clip shaped like a star tucked just behind her ear. Her boots gleamed. She held her leather-bound Ranger's Watch journal in her lap, fingers lightly tracing its edge. Ranger sat beside her, wearing a fresh black and silver service harness with a small embroidered patch that read, "City of Charleston Protector." His fur had been brushed that morning until it shone, though the scar on his ear remained visible, a soft badge of honor. He sat calmly, eyes scanning the small crowd gathering in the park, ears occasionally perking when someone clapped or called a greeting. People arrived in slow waves, neighbors from the 6th Street apartments, local shop owners, fellow veterans who had served with Elowen's father, and a handful of children wearing paper badges and Team Ranger pins. There were elderly couples, students with sketchbooks, and even a woman holding a hand-painted sign that read, "Not all heroes walk on 2 legs." At 2 p.m., a woman stepped onto the stage. Her name was Marcy Bell, a city councilwoman with a sharp bob haircut, a kind smile, and a booming voice made for microphones. She wore a red coat, pearl earrings, and a pin of the West Virginia state bird on her lapel. "Thank you for being here," she said into the mic, the crowd settling into attentive quiet. "Today we're not just honoring a dog, we're honoring courage, loyalty, and love. Ranger has stood between danger and a child. He's reminded us what protection really looks like. Not force, but presence. Not noise, but strength. And so, today by order of the mayor's office and the city council, we recognize Ranger, the service dog of Elowen Grace, as an honorary guardian of Charleston." She gestured, and 2 uniformed officers stepped forward. Officer Carla Mendoza and Officer Colin Ridge, both now familiar to the Grace family. Carla carried a black box with a silver medallion inside, engraved with a paw print and the words, "For courage in the face of threat, City of Charleston." Elowen wheeled herself forward, and Ranger stepped beside her. The audience was quiet again, save for the soft shuffle of leaves. Lucille wiped her hands on her coat, her breath shallow. Carla knelt and clipped the medallion onto Ranger's harness. She didn't say much, just looked the dog in the eye and whispered, "Thank you, soldier." Then it was Elowen's turn. She held up her journal with both hands, flipped to a page near the middle, and read into the microphone. "He doesn't bark the loudest. He doesn't run the fastest. But he stands the longest. When it mattered, he didn't lunge, he didn't bite, he didn't break. He stood. And that's what makes him a hero." There was a pause. Then Lucille began to cry, not in that quiet, polite way people sometimes do in public, but in the deep, overwhelmed way that comes when something heavy has finally been lifted. The kind of crying that doesn't come from pain, but from pride that spills out through the seams. Elowen glanced back, her own eyes wet. She wheeled herself over, grabbed her mother's hand, and whispered, "It's okay. He's still here." The crowd stood, every one of them. Applause rose slowly, then with force, like a wave crashing onto a shore. Some clapped with their hands, others thumped canes or stomped their feet. A boy in the front row let out a joyful whistle, and someone else began to chant, "Ranger! Ranger!" before laughter and cheers drowned everything else. Ranger didn't bark. He didn't flinch. He didn't even wag his tail fast. But his ears perked higher. His tail thumped once, then twice, against the grass. His gaze swept over the crowd, then turned toward Elowen and Lucille. And if a dog could smile, it would have looked just like that. Later, after most had left, after the cameras had been put away and the wreaths were packed up, the 3 of them sat under the oak tree near the edge of the park. Lucille sipped coffee from a thermos, her arm resting lightly around Elowen's shoulders. Elowen was sketching again, this time a simple drawing of Ranger's back as he sat on the stage, medallion catching the sun. She hadn't titled the page yet. She was waiting for the right words. And Ranger? He lay stretched beside them, his breathing slow, his eyes half closed, ears still listening. Charleston had finally said thank you, and he had heard it. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come with thunder or fire. They come with silence, loyalty, and a heartbeat that never leaves your side. Ranger didn't speak, but he reminded us of something divine, that protection is a form of love, and that love, true, unconditional love, is a gift from above. Maybe it was chance that brought Ranger into Elowen's life. Or maybe it was something more, a plan, a whisper from heaven that said, "She won't be alone." In our own lives, we may not have a German shepherd by our side, but we have moments, quiet, powerful moments, where grace shows up in the form of kindness, resilience, or even the courage to stand for someone else. So, if you've ever been protected, seen, or saved by a person, an animal, or a quiet miracle, remember to give thanks. May God bless you and everyone you love. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What's one moment in your life when you felt truly protected or loved? Share your story in the comments below. Subscribe for more true stories that touch the soul. And may the Lord continue to watch over you, just like Ranger watched over Elowin. A deep hole, two helpless puppies, and a mother dog too weak to fight back. When a group of cruel children tried to bury them alive, no one believed a miracle could come in time. But sometimes, compassion arrives from the smallest hands. What this little girl did next will break your heart and restore your faith in goodness. Stay with us, because this is not just a rescue. It's a story of courage, redemption, and the power of love. In the town of Sunridge, nestled between the sea and palm-lined streets of warm coastal British Columbia, there stood an old house at the corner of Palmview Street, a house long forgotten by time, its shutters broken, its paint faded by the relentless sun. The porch creaked even in silence, and the weeds had claimed the front steps like quiet mourners at a vigil. But what drew the attention of passers-by wasn't the house. It was the golden figure lying motionless in front of it. Maya was a golden retriever of about 7 years, though the years weighed more heavily on her than they should have. Her fur, once a lustrous honey gold, had dulled from sun exposure and bore patches of roughness from malnutrition. Her frame was thin, but not sickly. She held herself with a quiet dignity. Her eyes, though, told the full story. Large, amber, and filled with a sorrow so profound that those who dared to meet them could feel its pull. Maya had arrived at the house 4 years ago, silently, without announcement. She simply appeared one morning, curled beneath the shade of a drooping palm tree, watching the road with an intensity that made some uncomfortable. Nobody knew her past. There were whispers, of course. Some believed she had belonged to a family who once lived in that house, a family who had left in a hurry after a tragedy. Others thought she was a stray, perhaps abandoned nearby and drawn by some faint scent or distant memory. But the one truth no one could deny was this: Maya was waiting. Every morning, just after sunrise, Maya would rise slowly from her spot, stretch her legs with a kind of aching grace, and take exactly 12 steps forward to the edge of the gravel road. There, she would sit. She would watch. Cars would come and go, dogs would bark from across the neighborhood, but Maya never responded. Her world was narrowed to the moment a familiar face might return. Someone she once loved, someone who had promised to come back. Mr. Carson, the local mailman, had tried to coax her once. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 60s, with a long gray beard and a voice like gravel and kindness. He'd brought sausage and foil, crouched near her with slow movements and whispered words. She had taken the sausage with hesitant grace, but as soon as he reached for her collar, she turned and padded silently back to the porch. She wasn't feral, just uninterested in being rescued. "She's not lost," he told the neighbors later. "She's waiting for someone." The town respected that, or at least most of them did. Some teenagers would occasionally mock her or throw pebbles, but she never reacted with fear or aggression. She would simply turn her head away, as if enduring something beneath her. Most people began leaving out bowls of water or leftovers. It was unspoken. The house belonged to Maya now. Despite being out in the open, she kept herself safe. When storms came, she would curl up beneath the porch's overhang. In the rare cold spells, she found refuge behind the large potted plants that once adorned the porch in brighter times. But it was clear to anyone who looked closely that she had become part of the house. Or perhaps the house had become part of her. No one could imagine the old place without Maya lying in front of it. And then, one morning, almost exactly 4 years since her arrival, there were sounds, faint at first. Whimpers. Small, high-pitched cries from beneath the porch floorboards. Mr. Carson was the first to hear them during his morning route. He crouched, leaned down, and for the first time saw Maya not alone. 2 puppies. Tiny, frail things. Their fur barely more than fuzz. One was darker than her, deep caramel with eyes that darted constantly. The other was smaller, golden like Maya, but with a small white patch on its forehead. They trembled even in the warm air. The mailman took a slow breath. Well, I'll be damned. The town buzzed with the news that day. Maya had babies. Nobody had seen her pregnant. She'd kept it hidden. Or perhaps her slender frame had disguised it. Either way, she had somehow survived the harsh streets while carrying life within her. The pups, soon named by the locals as Solace and Brio, became symbols. Solace, the larger of the two, had a solemnity about her. Even at a few weeks old, she would sit beside Maya, unmoving, watching the world with a gravity that unsettled some. Brio, on the other hand, was all spark and motion. He tumbled in and out of the porch, chewed leaves, barked at butterflies. Where Solace was silence, Brio was song. But motherhood didn't soften Maya's resolve. If anything, it made her more anchored. She remained at the porch, feeding them, guarding them, refusing every attempt by townsfolk to take the pups. Some offered to bring them in, to care for them. Maya would simply stare, eyes firm, and turn her back. The message was clear. They stay here, with her. And so they did. Still, not all attention was kind. A group of boys, no older than 12, began circling the house in the afternoons. They threw sticks, made barking noises, kicked at the porch railings. Maya never fought back. She would pull her pups close, curl around them, endure the cruelty in silence. The boys laughed, thinking her cowardly. One day, Brio tried to bark back, his tiny voice cracking with indignation, and earned a pebble to the nose. Maya pressed her body over him, absorbing the pain. That moment was witnessed by someone else. From across the street, a pair of hazel eyes peered through the slats of a picket fence. Emma. She was 7, all elbows and curiosity. Her brown curls frizzed under the sun, and her cheeks were always dusted with freckles. Emma had a quiet soul, a child who preferred books to bikes, stars to screen time. Her mother, Sarah, a slim woman in her late 30s with short red hair and tired eyes, often described her as born with an old heart. Sarah herself had grown more reserved since her divorce 2 years prior. Once vibrant and social, she now lived in cautious solitude, working from home as a freelance copy editor, raising Emma alone. Emma had seen Maya before, of course, everyone had. But it wasn't until that day, when Maya curled around her injured pup, refusing to move, that something inside Emma shifted. She placed her hand over her heart, where she felt a strange ache. "She's not just waiting," Emma whispered to herself. "She's protecting." And so began something new. Not yet a friendship, not quite a mission, but a stirring of purpose in the heart of a little girl, and a dog who had once thought she was alone. The days in Sunridge seemed to stretch longer now, as if the town itself were holding its breath. Summer had reached its full blaze, painting the skies in blinding blues and casting sharp, unforgiving shadows under the palm trees. For Maya and her 2 pups, Solace and Brio, those shadows often came with sharp stones and cruel laughter. Every afternoon, around the same time the school bell rang and the air filled with the scent of grilled corn from the street carts, a small pack of boys arrived at the edge of Palmview Street. They were led by Tyson, a lanky 12-year-old with a permanent scowl etched into his thin face and a mop of dirty blonde hair that hung like it hadn't been brushed in days. Tyson had a loud, sharp voice that always demanded to be heard. He wasn't mean by nature, at least not originally. But after his father left town a year ago, taking nothing but a suitcase and leaving behind a bitter silence in their house, Tyson had changed. His mother, overworked and overwhelmed, barely noticed when he stayed out until dark. His companions, Liam and Carter, followed without much thought. Liam was short, round-faced, and always giggling at things that weren't truly funny. Carter, the quietest of the trio, had messy black hair and downturned eyes that rarely met anyone's gaze. He rarely threw anything himself, but he never stopped the others either. That made it worse somehow. They brought old cans, sticks, and sometimes firecrackers, left over from holidays no one celebrated anymore. Tyson called Maya Ghost Dog and the pups Scraps. He claimed they were cursed, that anyone who touched them would lose their voice or worse. It was, of course, nonsense. But to boys like Tyson, fear gave power, and power was better than feeling invisible. That afternoon, the boys circled the old house like they had done so many times before. Tyson picked up a handful of gravel and tossed it toward the porch. "Still guarding the ruins, huh?" he jeered. Maya didn't flinch. She simply stood, as always, and positioned her body in front of her pups. Solace nestled deeper into the shadow of her mother, while Brio tried to poke his head out, growling in his high-pitched, uncertain voice. A pebble hit the railing, then another bounced near Maya's paw. Brio barked louder. One more hit, and the little pup yelped. That's when Emma stepped forward. She had been watching from across the street, hiding behind the bushes that lined her yard. Her heart raced, but her feet moved without asking. She crossed the street like a soldier walking into enemy fire, fists clenched at her sides, her cheeks burning with anger. Tyson turned, surprised. "What are you doing here, Emma the Extra?" he sneered. That was the name he gave her at school, because she always asked extra questions, always did extra homework, always sat alone reading books that were too big for her age. "I saw you hit the puppy," Emma said, her voice trembling but steady. "It didn't hit him," Liam muttered. "It just scared him." "He's bleeding," Emma said, stepping onto the edge of the yard. Maya was staring at her now, tail still, ears perked. Brio whimpered quietly, and Solace's eyes, dark and calm, never left the boys. Tyson rolled his eyes. "They're strays. Who cares?" "I care," Emma replied. Her voice was louder now. "And if you hurt them again, I'll tell Principal Hayes." Tyson paused. That name still held weight. Principal Hayes, a stern but fair man in his late 50s with a deep voice and a love for bird-watching, had once dragged Tyson by the collar out of the cafeteria for starting a food fight. The memory was sharp enough to hold Tyson back, this time. Shh, whatever. They'll be gone soon anyway. He turned and walked off, Liam trailing behind him with uncertain glances. Carter lingered for a moment longer, his gaze flicking from Emma to Solace, then followed without a word. Emma waited until the boys had disappeared around the corner before she took another step forward. Maya didn't move, but she didn't turn away either. That was a start. Emma knelt carefully at the edge of the porch, her knees pressing into the warm dirt. Brio approached her first, his head cocked, his ears still trembling from fear. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small piece of biscuit. Brio sniffed it, then snatched it eagerly, his tail wagging a single time. Solace remained pressed against her mother, eyes solemn, unreadable. "You're very brave," Emma whispered to Maya. The dog blinked, and for the briefest moment, something softened in her face. Maybe it was gratitude. Maybe it was recognition. Or maybe it was just the exhaustion of being strong for too long. From the front door of the house across the street, Sarah, Emma's mother, stepped onto the porch. She was tall and slender, with short auburn hair, often pulled back in a loose clip. Her face, once expressive, now held a quiet weariness that only softened when she looked at Emma. Life had not been gentle with her. After her husband left, Sarah folded inward, like paper creased too many times. She worked as a copy editor for medical journals, spending long hours behind a screen and avoiding most neighbors. Seeing Emma at the abandoned house stirred something in her chest, a cocktail of fear, protectiveness, and a strange pride. "Emma!" she called out. Not unkindly, but with that careful tone mothers use when unsure whether to scold or support. Emma turned but didn't rise. "Mom, they hurt him. The puppy. I had to say something." Sarah hesitated, then crossed the street herself. Her sandals crunched softly over the pebbled edge of the yard. When she reached Emma's side, she looked at Maya properly for the first time. Up close, the dog looked even older. Not in body. Maya's muscles were still strong, but in soul. There was something ancient about her eyes, as if she had seen too much and spoken too little. Sarah crouched slowly beside her daughter. "She looks tired," she murmured. "She's been waiting here for 4 years, Emma said. "Mr. Carson told me." Sarah looked at her daughter, at the girl who carried too much compassion in her small heart. "And the puppies?" "Just a few weeks old, I think. They need help." Maya didn't move, but she didn't growl either. Brio had already nestled himself near Emma's knee, licking at her shoelaces. Solace had finally raised her head, watching Sarah now. Sarah let out a long breath. "We'll bring them water, tomorrow, and maybe some real food." Emma's face lit up, not a full smile, but something brighter than Sarah had seen in weeks. That night, as the town of Sunridge settled into its usual hum of crickets and distant waves, Maya stayed curled around her children beneath the porch, but her ears occasionally turned toward the house across the street, where a girl with warm hands and a soft voice was staring out her bedroom window, thinking only of the dog who never moved, and the shadows that were slowly beginning to change. The late afternoon light filtered through the swaying palm trees of Sunridge, casting elongated shadows across the cracked pavement of Palmview Street. The wind carried the distant hum of lawnmowers, barking dogs, and the rhythmic creak of swings from a nearby park. Emma stood at the edge of the sidewalk, arms folded behind her back, watching. Across the street, Maya rested on the porch of the abandoned house, her body curled protectively around her two puppies. Brio, ever the restless one, chewed on a fallen palm frond, while Solace sat close to Maya's chest, her eyes barely blinking as they scanned the horizon. The tension from a few days ago had eased slightly. Tyson and his gang hadn't returned, but Emma knew it was only a matter of time. She stepped forward, holding a shallow metal bowl filled with warm rice and shredded chicken her mother had let her prepare. It wasn't store-bought kibble, but it was real food, and Maya had begun to accept it without hesitation. The dog's posture remained guarded, but the stiff ridge along her back no longer bristled when Emma approached. Emma moved slowly, careful not to make sudden gestures. She placed the bowl a few feet from Maya, then sat on the bottom step of the porch, pulling her knees to her chest. "You're looking better," she said softly, watching Brio sniff at the bowl before diving in nose first. "I think Brio's going to be a troublemaker." Solace didn't approach the food immediately. She watched Emma with that same quiet intensity that Maya carried. Sometimes Emma wondered if Solace had inherited more than just her mother's coloring. Perhaps she carried her sadness too. The front door of the house creaked slightly in the breeze. Emma looked back at it. No one had dared step inside for years. The windows were boarded up, but the boards were old and weather-worn, some barely holding in place. There was a small metal mailbox still hanging beside the door, rusted through at the bottom. It bore a faint outline of the letters Parker. Emma made a mental note to ask her mother about the name later. She turned her attention back to Maya, who was watching her now, not just in passing, but fully. It wasn't the wary gaze of fear anymore, but something evaluating. Trust was too strong a word, but perhaps it was the first breath of something like it. Emma smiled gently and reached into her bag. She pulled out a folded sketchbook and a stubby pencil. "I drew you," she whispered, flipping to a page she had worked on the night before. The sketch was rough, but recognizable. Maya, curled around her puppies, the porch behind her like a frame. It wasn't perfect, but the eyes? She had tried hard to get those right. Emma held it up for a moment before setting it on the step, angled toward the dogs. Brio sniffed it briefly, then returned to his food. Maya didn't move, but her eyes lingered on the drawing. The sound of footsteps startled them both. Emma turned quickly to see an older woman approaching, a small canvas tote swinging at her side. She was petite and stooped slightly with age, her white hair pulled back into a tidy braid. Her clothes were simple, sandals, loose khaki pants, and a linen blouse, but her presence carried something solid and rooted. She walked with the confidence of someone who had lived in Sunridge for decades. "Oh, I didn't mean to startle you, dear," the woman said kindly. "I saw you sitting out here and thought I'd say hello." Emma stood instinctively, brushing off her shorts. "Hi, I was just, visiting." "I can see that," the woman smiled, glancing at Maya. "I've been bringing scraps now, and then myself. She's a brave one." Emma nodded. "Do you know her?" The woman stepped closer, setting her bag down gently. "I think I do. I'm Mrs. Helen Dawson, lived here longer than I care to count. That house belonged to the Parker family, years ago, young couple, sweet people. They moved away after a car accident. Haven't seen them since." Emma's heart quickened. She had never heard anything about the family before. Was Maya theirs? "I believe so. She showed up not long after they left. Wouldn't let anyone near her at first. Still doesn't, I suppose." Mrs. Dawson crouched with surprising ease, offering her palm to Brio, who sniffed her fingers before sneezing adorably. "But I think she stayed because she's still waiting for them. Dogs don't forget the ones they love." Emma was quiet for a moment, staring at Maya, who was now resting her head across her paws. "I want to help her," she said quietly. "She deserves more than this." Mrs. Dawson stood slowly and looked down at the girl. "Then keep coming. Keep showing up. She'll know. Dogs know who's real." That night, Emma sat at the kitchen table with Sarah, eating spaghetti, while her mind replayed every word Mrs. Dawson had said. Sarah watched her daughter quietly. She hadn't said much about the dog, but she could see the change in Emma, how her posture straightened, how she made fewer trips to her sketch pad and more to the porch across the street. "She was there again today?" Sarah asked gently. Emma nodded. "And I met a lady, Mrs. Dawson. She used to know the family who lived there. Maya belonged to them." Sarah twirled a strand of spaghetti around her fork, pausing before she spoke. People move on, sweetheart. Sometimes they don't mean to leave others behind. It just happens. Emma looked up. But she didn't move on. She waited. She still is. The table went quiet. I want to help her, Emma said again. And the puppies too. Sarah sighed, reaching across to squeeze her daughter's hand. Then let's figure out how. That weekend, Emma returned to the porch with a blanket from her bed, gently laying it beside the wooden step. Brio immediately climbed onto it, belly up, legs kicking with delight. Solace sat on the edge, one paw resting lightly on the fabric, as if unsure whether comfort was allowed. Maya watched, then slowly, ever so slowly, lowered her head onto the corner of the blanket. It wasn't a home, not yet, but it was a beginning. Sunridge awoke to a stillness that only comes after several days of summer storms. The air felt heavier, as if the trees themselves were holding a breath they hadn't quite exhaled. On Palmview Street, the abandoned house looked even older after the rain. The wood had darkened with moisture, the vines that climbed its side hung low, heavy with dew. But inside that forgotten frame, something was stirring. Emma arrived just after breakfast, holding a small plastic container of boiled chicken and rice. Her backpack bounced lightly on her shoulders, not full of books this time, but of curiosity. She had been thinking about the Parker family all night, who they were, what the accident had taken from them, and whether Maya still clung to their scent like a fading photograph. Brio greeted her first, tail wagging, nose nudging her hand before trying to climb halfway into her lap. Solace followed, quietly, sitting close by as if acting as Maya's silent observer, and Maya herself. Maya had started to change. Her eyes, still solemn, no longer flinched at Emma's footsteps. When the girl sat beside her on the porch, Maya no longer shifted away. She accepted the presence, if not yet the touch. Emma glanced behind Maya at the half-open porch door. It had been ajar for as long as she could remember, creaking slightly when the wind picked up. She hesitated. Then, slowly, she stood. I want to see where you waited, she whispered. Maya didn't move. The door groaned as Emma pushed it open with both hands. Dust flew into the light like 1,000 suspended memories. The living room was dark and stale, the air tinged with the scent of wood rot and time. A long-forgotten couch sagged in the center of the room, its cushions torn at the edges. The wallpaper had begun peeling, revealing the aged bones of the house beneath. A child's chair rested on its side near the fireplace. A single sandal, long too small for any child now, lay nearby. Emma stepped in, holding her breath. Brio followed, snuffling noisily along the edges of the rug. Solace stopped at the doorway, while Maya stood just outside, her head low but eyes locked on Emma. In the far corner of the room was a low cabinet. Its doors had warped, but one hung open slightly, revealing something inside. Emma crouched down, her fingers brushing aside cobwebs and dust. She pulled open the cabinet and found a small, worn cardboard box, its lid half crushed under the weight of time. Inside were fragments, memories captured in ink and color, a set of faded photographs, edges curled, a cracked rubber ball, once red, a child's drawing in crayon, a stick figure family with a dog, labeled in a scrawl that read, Maya. Emma stared. She pulled out the photographs carefully, wiping dust from their surfaces. In one, Maya sat in the grass beside a young woman with sun-kissed skin and dark curls tied back with a red ribbon. The woman was smiling wide, holding a baby in her lap. In another, a man with broad shoulders and kind eyes lifted the child in the air, Maya's tongue mid-lick as she tried to reach the baby's foot. Emma's heart ached. This wasn't just a dog waiting out of instinct. Maya had once been someone's joy, someone's family. Behind her, the floor creaked softly. Emma turned. Sarah stood in the doorway, her arms folded, face taut with both worry and something else, something gentler. I saw the door open. I got scared, Sarah said, stepping inside. She wore jeans and a loose cardigan, her hair tucked behind her ears. She looked around the room, her gaze lingering on the photos in Emma's hands. Oh, she breathed, walking closer. She really was theirs? Emma nodded, holding up the picture of the young woman with the baby. I think this is her family. Sarah crouched beside her, gently touching the photograph. She's been waiting for them all this time. They left her behind, Emma said quietly. We don't know that, Sarah replied, though her voice lacked conviction. Maybe they didn't have a choice. Emma looked down. Maya didn't give up. Brio padded forward, his tail sweeping the floor. He sniffed at the box, then nosed deeper, pulling out an old baby sock and chewing on it with contentment. Sarah smiled faintly. We should keep these, she said. They might help us find them. That night, Emma laid the photographs on the kitchen table and stared at them for hours. Sarah snapped a few pictures on her phone and promised to ask around online. There weren't many Parkers in Sunridge, but she had a friend who worked at the town hall. Maybe a last name and an old address would be enough to find something. The next day, they returned to the porch and placed the pictures in a small frame Emma had decorated with shells from the beach. She set it near the edge, facing Maya. The dog sniffed at it gently, then rested her head beside it. It was the first time Emma had seen her look truly peaceful. A week passed, then another. The rhythms of Sunridge continued. Beach umbrellas opened under golden skies, waves hummed against the distant cliffs, and neighborhood dogs barked at bicycles like tiny sentinels. But for Emma and Sarah, each day brought a mounting sense of anticipation. The photographs found in the box had been scanned and posted on local message boards. Sarah even joined a few social media groups dedicated to reconnecting lost pets with former owners. Every post included a photo of Maya, her soulful eyes and golden coat dulled by time, but unmistakable. Each night, Sarah read Emma the messages they received. Some kind, some curious, and many that led nowhere. But Emma never gave up hope, and neither, it seemed, did Maya. The dog had begun sleeping on the blanket Emma had given her, sometimes with Brio curled tightly against her side and Solace pressed close behind. She accepted food more readily now, even allowing Sarah to place bowls near her without retreating. Still, she never ventured far. She remained rooted to the house, as though her very presence held its crumbling structure together. Then came the message. It was late on a Thursday night when Sarah opened her inbox and saw the subject line, "I think I know this dog." She clicked it immediately. The sender's name was David Parker. In the body of the message, he explained that he was the younger brother of Lauren Parker, who had lived in Sunridge with her husband and son until 4 years ago. He included a photo, an old family picture taken in the backyard of the very house Maya now guarded. There was Lauren, holding a baby boy in her arms, her husband standing behind her, and at their feet, Maya. Younger, brighter, but unmistakably her. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she read on. After the accident, the family had moved to another province. Lauren had been badly injured and had lost some of her memory. There had been chaos, confusion, and a rushed departure. David confessed that they had believed Maya had run off and died in the woods. They had mourned her, but he had forwarded the photos Sarah posted to Lauren, and something in her changed. She didn't speak for a long time after the accident, David wrote, but when she saw Maya's picture, she whispered her name. The email ended with a question. Would it be okay if we came to see her? Emma nearly knocked over her chair when Sarah told her. She jumped up, barefoot on the kitchen tiles, and wrapped her arms around her mother with such force that Sarah nearly teared up herself. "Do you think Maya will remember them?" Emma asked. "I don't know," Sarah said softly, "but I think she already does." 3 days later, they arrived. It was late afternoon when a dark blue SUV pulled slowly onto Palmview Street and stopped in front of the old house. Emma stood on the porch beside Maya, who had risen to her feet the moment the engine approached. Her body was stiff, alert, but not afraid. Brio barked once and then sat, ears high. Solace, as always, remained near Maya's legs. The passenger door opened first. A man stepped out, tall, with sandy hair and a weathered face. His name was Adam Parker, and his eyes darted immediately to the porch. "She's really here," he said, his voice breaking. The driver's side opened next, and a woman stepped out slowly, aided by David Parker, who had come along to support them both. Lauren Parker had soft features and deep brown eyes, though they seemed clouded by pain or time. A thin scar ran along her jaw, fading but still present. She moved carefully, as though every step required concentration. But when she looked at Maya, her breath caught in her throat. "Maya," she whispered. The dog didn't move. Then Lauren reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small, a red ribbon frayed at the edges. She held it out, her hand shaking. Maya took a step, then another. And then she ran. The golden retriever leapt off the porch, her limbs moving like they hadn't in years. She skidded slightly on the gravel, her tail thrashing, a sound emerging from her chest that was somewhere between a bark and a sob. Lauren fell to her knees just as Maya reached her, burying her face in the woman's chest, licking her hands, her neck, her face. Adam knelt beside them, his arms wrapping around both, his tears falling freely onto Maya's fur. David stood nearby, his eyes shining. Emma, watching from the porch, felt something deep and warm bloom in her chest. She looked up at Sarah, who placed a hand on her shoulder, her own expression unreadable, but full of emotion. Brio and Solace stood at the edge of the yard, watching. Maya turned and barked softly, a sound that made the puppies perk up. They ran forward, uncertain, but were soon enveloped into the embrace. The Parkers stayed in Sunridge for the night, renting a small room at the local inn. The next morning, they returned to the house with Emma and Sarah, bringing food, toys, and soft voices. Maya stayed close to Lauren the entire time. Her eyes never left her once. In the afternoon, as they prepared to leave, Adam crouched beside Emma. He looked tired but peaceful. "You saved her," he said. "We thought she was gone, but you brought her home." Emma smiled shyly, her hand resting gently on Brio's back. "She was never really gone," she said, "just waiting." The morning after the reunion brought with it a rare stillness in Sunridge. Not the kind born from silence, but the kind that came after something beautiful had happened. Word of Maya's reunion with her family had begun to spread quietly through the neighborhood, whispered between fences and shared over cups of morning coffee. But on Palmview Street, in front of the old Parker house, the world had already shifted. Maya no longer stood watch at the porch. She now lay under the shade of a tall palm, her head resting on Lauren's knee as the woman stroked her ears with a trembling hand. Solace stayed close to her mother, never more than a few feet away. But Brio, ever the explorer, had found his way into Emma's lap and refused to leave. It wasn't just a whim. Something had been growing between the little pup and the little girl for weeks now, a bond not spoken, but stitched together in quiet visits, shared biscuits, and the echo of a soft voice reading stories aloud from behind the fence. Brio had curled against Emma's feet while she sketched, nosed at her backpack with curiosity, and licked away her tears the day Tyson threw that rock. Emma sat cross-legged on the lawn, holding Brio gently, his head tucked beneath her chin. Her heart was full, but also aching. Maya would leave today. The Parker family had packed their car that morning, folding blankets and gently stacking bowls into boxes like sacred objects. They had decided to take Maya and Solace home, back to a new place they had made their own after years of rebuilding. They had invited Emma and Sarah to come say goodbye. Sarah stood nearby, her arms crossed, sunglasses shading her expression. She was dressed in a soft blue sundress, her auburn hair pinned loosely at the back. She had greeted Lauren and Adam with warmth, though a bit of reserve. Old wounds ran deep, and watching Emma form such a strong connection with Brio brought both pride and a quiet worry she hadn't voiced. Adam Parker approached now, walking with a thoughtful slowness that made him appear older than his years. His hands were calloused, hands used to building things, fixing things, and he held a red collar in one of them. He knelt beside Emma and looked at her carefully. "Brio likes you." Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. Adam smiled. "I think he's chosen." Emma blinked. "What do you mean?" "We were talking," he said, glancing over at Lauren, who was now placing her hands on Maya's back. "And we realized something. Brio doesn't belong to us the way Maya and Solace do. He was born in this place, in this time, and he belongs to someone who's been here for him from the beginning." Emma's eyes widened. "Me? If you want him," Adam said gently, "we'd be honored." Tears welled up instantly. Emma looked down at Brio, who thumped his tail once, twice, as if understanding every word. Sarah stepped forward, and for a moment, everything hung in silence. Emma looked up at her mother, searching. Sarah's lips curved into a small, soft smile. "I think we have room for one more." Emma let out a laugh, half sob, half joy, and hugged Brio tightly. The little puppy squirmed in delight, licking her chin and barking his high, cheerful bark. They spent the rest of the morning preparing for the farewell. Lauren and Maya shared long, quiet moments together. Solace, ever the watcher, finally let Emma touch her head gently before retreating back to her mother's side. David Parker helped Adam secure the last of the boxes, occasionally glancing toward Sarah with a quiet, respectful nod. There was something in David, a man in his early 40s with salt-streaked dark hair and a thoughtful face, that made Sarah pause more than once. He carried himself like someone who had weathered grief and come through humbled, not hardened. Before they left, Lauren approached Emma, her eyes misty but steady. "You gave her back to me," she said, kneeling to Emma's height, "and I will never forget that." Emma hugged her tightly. "She waited for you. I just listened." Lauren smiled and tucked a strand of Emma's hair behind her ear. "You did more than listen. You believed her." With one final round of hugs and a few more tears, the Parker family loaded into their SUV, Maya resting in the back seat, her head on Solace's side. As the car pulled away down Palmview Street, Maya lifted her head and looked out the window. Her eyes found Emma, and in them was something clear, deep, and still. Gratitude, peace, goodbye. Brio barked after the car, running a few steps before circling back to Emma's feet. He sat down and looked up at her, his new person, his family. That evening, Sarah and Emma stood on their porch watching the sunset. The sky had turned soft orange, streaked with lavender, and Brio lay curled beside Emma's bare feet. Sarah placed her hand on her daughter's shoulder. "You did something incredible," she said. Emma leaned her head against her mother's side. "We did." From across the street, the old Parker house stood quiet again, but not abandoned, not anymore. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes, they come quietly, through the soft touch of a child's hand, the patient eyes of a mother dog, and the steady faith of a heart that refuses to give up. Maya waited for 4 long years, not knowing if her family would ever return. But through Emma's compassion and persistence, something divine was set in motion. It wasn't just a reunion. It was a reminder that love, even when buried beneath time and sorrow, is never truly lost. In a world that often feels rushed and uncertain, this story teaches us that God still works through the small, everyday choices we make, through kindness, through belief, through love that acts. We pray that you, dear viewer, may carry this same hope into your own life. May God bless you and your family with the courage to love deeply, the strength to wait patiently, and the faith to believe in quiet miracles. Just like Maya, just like Emma. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to remember that love always finds a way. Leave us a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts or stories of loyalty and hope. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more emotional stories that remind us we're never too far from grace. May God's light guide you, and may His miracles find you, sometimes in the most